Thank you. So good morning, everyone. As the director said, thank you very much. My name is Tamika Hart. I'm so honored to be here today. And today I come before you in my role as co-chair of the Memphis Talent Dividend. And the Memphis Talent Dividend is a college attainment initiative. Our aim is to boost the college attainment level in the Memphis metropolitan area. And so we work and devise strategies that will work on the K-12 and with higher education to make sure that we can increase the number of youth and adults who have college education. Many may not know there are a good number of adults in Memphis, in this community, who have some college, some who have 2 or more years of college, just never finished that degree. And so we have come together as an initiative. We're a collaboration of about 80 organizations, higher ed, nonprofit organizations, the school system is part of it, and individuals who are all just committed to saying, we know that if we boost our college attainment, we boost the economic reality of our community. And so thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today on the status of human rights in Tennessee. As the agency that enforces the Tennessee Human Rights Act and the Tennessee Disability Act, your role is very important in showing that people actually are treated fairly and that they have legal redress when they are not. So thank you for traveling across our state to hear from people on the ground every day about what issues could be negatively impacting the lives and rights of our Tennesseans. The Memphis Talent Dividend, we're embarking on a new initiative. We're specifically focusing on African American achievement, specifically African American men achievement. Not that we're saying that other achievement areas are not, but we recognize that the levels of achievement and the among African American men is really anemic, and there's a lot more we can do. One example, across the nation, about 19% of black women, 16% of black men have attained a bachelor's degree, compared to 28% of white women and 30% of white men. And Memphis, for black men, that number is 11% have a bachelor's degree or higher, and so we know we can do better. Now, we also know that there are many factors that go into why they're low achievement, the low college attainment level, well, I'm sorry, of the college attainment level being so low. And one of is the low academic achievement level on the secondary level, right, the K-12. We're not properly educating our students, we're not properly educating our students, and we are missing the mark with black male students more than any other level. Other areas are that not enough or not more African Americans are going to college just because a good number are dropping out, too many dropping out of high school, especially among our African American men. So then the question becomes, well, then what are the factors that contribute to that? And there are many that contribute to low academic levels and low graduation rate. What I want to talk about today is the ineffective discipline practices that can result in the disparities and suspensions from school, certainly for African Americans, certainly for African American men. These practices that are implemented ineffectively and unfairly, whether intentional or not, that's not the point. The point is whether it was even if it's just a disparate impact, the point is students are missing school. And if you're missing school, you can't have high academic achievement, and you certainly can't graduate. As you know, I'm sure, on January 8th of this month, just a couple of weeks ago, the federal government, the combination of Department of Justice and the Department of Education, just released guidelines on what school districts should do to improve their discipline practices and policies. Those guidelines were produced in response to data from the Federal Office of Civil Rights that indicates there really is a disparity between the treatment of African American students, of students of color, because Latino students and even our Native students are included in that. There's really disparities between the treatment of students of color and white students. So African American students, according to the findings, are 3 times as likely as white students to be expelled or suspended from school. Black students comprise 16% of the students in this country, but they make up 35% of those that are suspended once, make up 44% of the students that face multiple suspensions, and they make up 36% of the expelled students. Even more alarming, 50% of the students in this country, recent data, who were arrested or had contact with law enforcement were Latino or African American. It is important to note that the Office of Civil Rights reports that the research suggests that these disparities are not because students of color are behaving worse.
No.
or because they are misbehaving more frequently. That it is really a disparity, thus making it a legitimate human rights and civil rights issue that we need to address. And Tennessee, unfortunately, is no better than our nation. According to our state's most recent data on its report card, African American students comprise 24% of the students in the state. Our white students comprise 66% of the students in the state. Approximately 19% of African American students are suspended, and about 2% are expelled, compared with 4% of white students and 0.1%, 4% for suspension, of white students, and 0.1% of expulsions. So that amounts to, you can do the math, 4 times the number of suspensions for African American students and 20 times the number of expulsions for African American students as compared to our white students. Again, it's worth repeating that the Office of Civil Rights reports that this is not because they're behaving more or they're acting, worse than other students. It's about a disparity, and I will say that data, looked at national data, it will be worth determining if the same impact and effect is happening in our own state. When you look at the data, it was too many school systems, but I have to tell you, I looked at the data for several school systems. I did not find one where the data didn't match up. Right. In some school systems where it seemed like there may be 2 black kids in that school system, their suspensions were 4 or 5 times more than the systems were. Because I looked at every large district, I looked at the small districts where I could determine there's not enough African American students for this to be the case. It is the case, and so I looked at the data for not every system, but just about, and the numbers are all mirrored. African American students are being suspended and expelled at far greater rates than our white students. So the Department of Justice and the Department of Education and a number of civil rights organizations, including NAACP, have credited the inequitable application of school districts' discipline policies to the disparities in the treatment. It has been noted that the suspension and expulsion policies, including and especially in some areas zero tolerance policies, are the main driver of this disparity. Now, no one disagrees that districts and states and schools need safe and orderly schools. No one is disagreeing that school districts need to be empowered to implement policies and practices that would ensure that kids get to school and that they're safe at school and that they're there to get a great lesson. But districts need to be careful that their policies and practices do so without the consequences of unfair treatment to any student. In response to the data showing disparities in their districts, there are schools across this country that have worked with organizations, again, the NAACP being one, another is the Advancement Project, another is the Children's Defense Fund. They have worked with these organizations to change their policies. And over years, what you see is dramatic decreases in the number of expulsions and suspensions because they have enforced policies that are more about teaching children. Discipline is an education, right? We use discipline and punishment interchangeably. Punishment is the response to misbehavior. Discipline is the education that children are taught, and that what's guide them, and that's how they know right from wrong, and that's how they can measure their own behavior and begin to determine, should I do this or should I not do this? So it is a process. It is not something to do. And so what is happening, those districts realize we can have positive behavior policies that help us streamline. There are always going to be suspensions. There are always going to be expulsions, right? There's some things we know that there's a zero tolerance for bringing a weapon to school. We get that. But there are some things, and I want to share with you, under Tennessee law, districts really are allowed to suspend students for almost any behavior, right, including truancy. Right. When you look at the language, there's always in legislation that catch-all language, and so when you look at the Tennessee rules and regulations around discipline and what can be suspended and excluded, there's and for any violation of rules, right? And one piece says, any other conduct prejudicial to good order. Yeah. So that's first we're going to, delineate what can and cannot be, you can be expelled for or suspended, but then just in case, for any violation of rules or conduct that's prejudicial to good order. And what I can tell you is that I know for a fact that there are some schools, for whatever reason, overuse this power, and there are students who, you know, I'm a former school teacher. I taught school 5 years, so I know that feeling, you know, boy, you got on my nerves yesterday, out of here, and you want them gone. But should we really be doing that? And the question we should ask, who really benefits when students are excluded from school attendance? The results of the inequity in discipline practices feed into what has been called the school to prison pipeline. According to the Advancement Project, which is a multiracial civil rights organization, and they were created to develop and inspire community-based solutions to addressing these problems and eradicating the inequitable policies, more than 3 million children are suspended every year in this country. Students who are suspended are often unsupervised. They're just home, which can lead to more trouble because, you know, idle hands out of the devil's workshop, right? So they're unsupervised, they're at home, they're not getting needed education for academic or for what was wrong with your behavior. You know, this is just the response to your behavior. Where is the education? Where are the professional people in the schools, the counselors, the behavior specialists, those who can actually be working with those students as opposed to those students being suspended? We have to question the effectiveness of suspensions. What are students to learn from the experience? How will their behavior be rehabilitated if they're not receiving the care and instruction of professional educators? What is the impact on their academic achievement? How is it beneficial to the students? How is it beneficial to the community? How is it beneficial to the school system, to the state? In addition to suspensions, often discipline practices result in students being referred to law enforcement. Needless to say, this raises a whole other level of concerns. And this gets into the disproportionate minority contact of students with law enforcement. Studies show that students of color are disproportionately referred to law enforcement. We know that in 2012, the Department of Justice investigation of the Shelby County juvenile court system showed that our own juvenile court system was in fact discriminating against African American students. That our own juvenile court system was in fact denying African American students their constitutionally required due process rights. That disproportionately, our juvenile court system were referring students to the adult criminal justice system, and they were failing to protect them from self-incrimination, among other findings. So students now get into a schoolyard fight, just a fight, which any fight is really an assault, right? And Josh says, you know, if it's assault and battery, could be, right? But it's just a schoolyard fight. Now many of those kids are being handled by police. Right. What happened to the day when a schoolyard fight got you in the principal office? Right. They now get you in jail. And that just starts a vicious cycle for students. And I tell parents all the time, you know, if your kids fight at home, if you call the police, guess what's going to happen? They're going to jail. I know no parent think their siblings who fight at home see them as criminal. They see them as children who are fighting. Now, I will separate this from fights that include bodily harm, that you're talking about weapons are engaged, delineate that, we'll separate those up. But we're just talking about students who are just misbehaving, students who are insubordinate. Yes, that is very frustrating to an adult, but should that child really be leaving that school in handcuffs because he or she says something inappropriate to an adult? We happen to do better. We have to do better, is what I meant to say. And we can and must do better. So quickly, I just want to conclude that guideline that I mentioned from the federal government released a couple of weeks ago. It provided for 3 things that school districts should do. And I certainly will be submitting these to you, Susanna. The first thing it says, we should create positive climates and focus on prevention by engaging all students in the educational process and by implementing interventions to student behavior and emotional needs for students. Could their issues be treated, but they can also, again, be provided that excellent education that they need for discipline. We need to equip districts and schools with the resources needed to fully serve students in their academic and in their emotional needs. The second principle was we need to develop clear, appropriate, and consistent expectations and consequences to address disruptive student behavior. Again, as a former teacher, I know the challenges that teachers face. I also know that often teacher prep programs, I'm a product of a teacher prep program at the University of Tennessee, proud, and I now work for a large teacher prep program with Teach for America. I know that our prep programs often do not equip teachers with what they need to be effective classroom managers. And we need to make sure in Tennessee, our teacher prep programs, whether it's a college of education or it's an alternative program like the ones for which I work, that they do have the resources needed to ensure teachers and staff have the proper training, including cultural competency training, so that they can understand what our disabled students face, right? Because I didn't mention the disabled students. Disabled students are treated almost worse than the racial divide. And so to make sure that they understand those communities and the professional development. Finally, the guidelines say we need to ensure that there's fairness, equity, and continuous improvement, and this is where this commission plays a role, by regularly evaluating policies and practices to ensure all students are treated fairly. We have civil rights obligations to our students when they're in our schools. And the state needs to, and we do have provisions in our state where districts have to report up to the Commissioner of Education, reports around discipline and what's happening. But what I can say, if you look at the data, is surely the report is going somewhere, but it doesn't seem that anything is happening as a result. Because our data is clear, the disparities are here, and we don't seem to be doing anything about it. Just in conclusion, again, we know and agree that districts must be empowered to maintain safe schools. Districts should be equipped with the power and resources needed to do so. But please, let's help them be mindful of the consequences of ineffective, overly broad policies that make it all too easy for school systems to suspend or expel students. Districts should be required to constantly review their policies and results thereof, and they should be challenged to address them when there are clear disparities shown by their data. I hope this commission will encourage the legislature and the school districts to review the new federal guidelines that have just been released and encourage them to use them to ensure we are treating all of our students fairly. There are organizations like the Urban League, like the NAACP, the Advancement Project, the Children's Defense Fund, who are great resources for working locally with communities on building community-based resources and solutions for this. We want all of our students to thrive. We want them all to have a great education, and we want to place them all in the school to career pipeline. But as long as we continue with ineffective policies that unnecessarily exclude students, we are ensuring that far too many of them are on the school to prison pipeline. Thank you so much for your time and for this information, and we look forward to a better day for human rights for all in all of these areas in our state. Thank you.
One thing that you said something about organization working with the disparity problem. Have they come up with anything that they can implement?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Across, and it's been, so for instance, the NAACP in Broward County, Florida, worked with the Broward County school system, and they develop a whole different policy and memorandum of understanding, especially when it comes to the police presence in schools, what the police will do versus what they won't do, what the school should handle, and what kinds of reporting will go to parents and that sort of thing. And so, as I said, those organizations that I listed, the Advancement Project is really one to look up to. They go across the country, work with districts. They're working in Los Angeles right now, and they help them understand, I know you don't see the problem with this policy as it's written, but let me tell you what the consequences of this policy can result in. And so I don't know of any that's working in Tennessee now, but my suggestion is we need to take a look at it because our disparities are there. We're just not doing anything about it, and organizations like the Advancement Project, Children's Defense Fund would be great resources for us to say, let's look at it. Oh, we didn't even realize this was happening. What kind of training can we go into many of these school systems and provide and make sure that they understand the bias, known or unknown?
Another question. Our disparity here in Tennessee, is it higher or lower than the national?
It was almost the same. It was almost the same. The expulsions were 20 times higher, so that's now I would say you know in Tennessee our statute does make it somewhat difficult. I mean, because it does specify what can be what students can be expelled for, and I would say that with a 2% rate amongst African American versus a 0.1%, that's a great disparity. But at least it didn't say 20% of African American students were being expelled and 20% of white students. So we seem to be doing better keeping that number low in many areas, but just the gap in between the treatment of the students is still alarming.
Thank you.
But if you just aggregate the data, and on some systems, it looks, and really in some small systems,
yes,
it really looks bad.
Yeah.
The
data, I would say the data in some small systems, to me, it almost seems like, okay, for this to be the percentage, like every black kid is getting suspended in this system versus the white kids. I mean, I don't know, you know, it could be 10 other kids are getting suspended every other week, but it's just such disparity for
Yes.
such low population that we really need to not just have that. I mean, it's great that we have a report. You can go on the Tennessee Department of Education report card and see it yourself, but the question becomes, well, what's been done about it though? Like we send this data each year, are we doing anything to address it? That becomes the question.
And the other piece on that one also is, and Tamika knows this is the topic, one of the topics of our race relations summit coming up in Jackson. But the other piece on that one is, in some systems, what they've done is they've got a graduate level of offenses. So you can actually get thrown out for something as simple as talking or chewing gum.
Mm-hmm.
If you got, they got a 1 offense, 2 offense, and then a 3rd offense,
Right.
and it graduates to a larger offense. So it's like you can get thrown out for something that you really would, being not having a permit to go from one class to another. So it's
So a student is with the teacher said you're chewing gum, the teacher said, I'm not chewing gum.
Right.
So you turn and your elbow hits the teacher, that you violated rules, you got insubordination, you got a possible assault. Well, that can get you expelled, that one action that quickly.
So you're saying from out of the school system?
Oh, yeah.
Not suspension?
I mean, you get 180 days.
You're right.
Chewing gum.
Yeah, because see, what it will have done, like she said, it was talking back and gum chewing. Going chewing twice and talking back. So it becomes a large offense if it happens, because it becomes progressive. And some of them got it written into their policy.
Wow.
Probably less for a hearing such as this and more for a conversation and about race. I'm a big fan of a radio show when I'm able to in the morning, but with Michelle Martin. I'm not sure people. She's got a radio show called Tell Me More, which is by the Public Black Network. She's got a fun segment. One of the women in the beauty shop, and then on Fridays it's men at the barber shop. And they talk and discuss things that they have to tell their black children
Right.
about the realities of the world.
What happens when you see the police? What
Right,
happens when
and things that I haven't had to sit down and talk with my grandsons about. And when there is a dysfunction in that family, or there isn't a 2-parent family, et cetera, all the social ill, who's talking to the kids?
Right.
Is it girls' club? Is it girls and boys club?
If they're going.
I mean, where is this conversation happening for kids early on? And it's a shame it has to be a different conversation.
Well, and so if I could
That's
just quickly,
reality here.
just as a concrete example, and then I'll sit down. When I was teaching, and I taught in Georgia, not Memphis, in Cobb County, Georgia, suburb of Atlanta, but I had a colleague who's a white teacher, and she was really upset. She had written up her student for an African-American young lady for insubordination. And so I was like, well, tell me what happened. And so she was telling me the conversation, and she was like, and she just wouldn't look at me. And I said, what do you mean? She said, I'm talking to her, and I kept telling her, look at me. I said, oh, that's because her big mama told her, who you eyeballing. That's why. I said, so she know better. I said, she's in trouble. She's not going to look at you. She's looking down. She was not, in fact, being disrespectful.
Right.
She was showing you the utmost respect.
Right.
But because that was seen as disrespectful, she got, so those are things that we can deal with. We can train, and we can provide the resources. So thank you very much for your time here.
Thank you. Excellent.